Imagine waking up not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the low growl of artillery rolling across the frozen fields, a sound so deep it vibrates through your ribs before you're even fully conscious. The air in your lungs feels like shards of glass. Your breath escapes in pale clouds that vanish into the dim gray of dawn. The canvas above your head, your tent, is stiff with frost. It seems lined with ice. You reach for your boots, but they're frozen solid like two chunks of iron. Your fingers, numb and slow, refuse to obey. You sit there, wrapped in a damp blanket that smells of sweat, smoke, and wet wool, trying to remember how long it's been since you felt warm. Welcome to winter on the Eastern Front, 1943. If you think you could survive this, listen closely because the truth is, most couldn't. You might imagine yourself brave, strong, ready for the challenge of war, but here bravery means something different. It's not the shouting, charging kind. It's the quiet kind, the kind that lets you keep moving when every nerve in your body begs you to stop. The soldiers beside you aren't heroes. They're ghosts in waiting, skin stretched thin over bones, eyes dulled by hunger and fear. One coughs blood into the snow. Another mutters a prayer that freezes halfway out of his mouth. Somewhere in the distance, a machine gun chatters, then falls silent again, as if the front itself is breathing. The ground under you is hard as stone, a mix of dirt, snow, and the bodies of men who froze before dawn. Your rifle lies beside you, slick with frost, the metal biting your palm when you touch it. You rub your thumb along the bolt, trying to keep it from sticking. Every motion feels deliberate, ritualistic, like some grim ceremony performed before breakfast. And breakfast, if it comes, is a tin of gray mush shared among 6 men. You scoop it with your fingers, the cold numbing your tongue so you hardly taste the salt. The smell of it, grease and smoke, turns your stomach, but you swallow anyway. Hunger is stronger than disgust. The officer passes by, wrapped in a heavy coat, his boots somehow dry. He doesn't meet your eyes. Orders come in a low, tired voice. We move in 10 minutes. No one groans. No one asks where. You all know it doesn't matter. The direction is forward, always forward, through snow that comes up to your knees, through villages burned to black skeletons, through the memory of warmth that feels more like a dream than a fact. You tighten your belt and stand, your legs stiff. The wind whips against your face, tiny knives of ice cutting into your cheeks. The horizon is a smear of white and gray, the sun a dull coin behind the clouds. You start walking. The sound of boots crunching in the snow becomes hypnotic, like the ticking of a clock that measures not time, but endurance. You lose track of how long you've been moving. The world narrows to breath, step, breath, step. Then a distant rumble. The ground shakes, a dull thud rolls across the fields. Artillery, someone murmurs. You drop flat, face pressed into the icy crust, heart pounding. The next shell lands closer. Snow and dirt rain down, bits of shrapnel hum through the air like hornets. You can't hear your own breath. You taste metal, maybe your own blood. When the barrage stops, you get up slowly. The man next to you doesn't. His face is half buried in the snow, eyes open, glassy, surprised. You move on. You don't have time to think. Later, when night falls, the cold becomes a living thing. You huddle with the others back to back, sharing what little warmth your bodies can produce. The silence between you is heavy, punctuated only by the occasional crack of ice or the distant echo of a shot. Someone whispers about home, about his wife, his son, a photograph he keeps in his pocket, but his voice trembles and he stops before finishing. No one asks him to continue. The moonlight spills across the camp like milk, turning every shadow blue. You stare at your hands, swollen and cracked, the skin splitting near the nails. The pain is constant, dull. You try to imagine sleep, but your body won't allow it. Every muscle aches, your stomach gnaws itself. You think about food, real food, bread still warm, soup steaming in a bowl, the smell of onions and butter. You can almost taste it, feel the heat on your face. But then the wind howls again and the illusion breaks. The only smell is smoke and rot. A medic passes by, checking the wounded. His breath steams in the dark. He carries a small bag, but there's not much inside. A few bandages, morphine if you're lucky. He kneels beside a boy no older than 19, whose leg ends abruptly at the knee. The stump is wrapped in a filthy cloth that seeps through. The boy stares up at the stars, lips moving silently. Maybe he's praying. Maybe he's just counting the seconds until the morphine takes effect. You watch and think, I couldn't do it. Not the pain, not the hunger, not the endless cold. You tell yourself you'd fight, that you'd endure, but deep down, your mind would crack before your body does. And when it does, there's no fixing it. That's the secret they don't teach in history books. War isn't just about death. It's about slow unraveling, the kind that strips away everything human until you're just an instinct with a rifle. The next morning, frost has glued your clothes to your skin. You peel them off layer by layer, the fabric tearing where it froze to your body. You light a cigarette, the smoke biting your throat. For a moment, the warmth from it feels like life itself. Around you, men cough, curse, stretch stiff limbs. The sky glows pale pink, deceptively beautiful. Somewhere far away, the artillery starts again. You wonder if it will ever stop. They say the war will end soon, that the enemy is retreating, but that's just noise, something officers say to keep men moving. In your gut, you feel the truth. The war doesn't end. It just moves. It shifts shape, changes names, but it never truly dies. You march again that day, past burned-out tanks and the carcasses of horses frozen in mid-motion, eyes wide open as if still galloping. The air reeks of diesel, smoke, and decay. A bird lands on a ruined wall and flies off again, startled by the crack of distant gunfire. You stumble, catch yourself, and keep walking. Your world is this: snow, blood, smoke, breath. Somewhere deep inside, a part of you still believes in survival. That tiny spark, hope or delusion, it's hard to tell, keeps your legs moving. You think of the ones who didn't make it, whose names are already fading, swallowed by the noise of history. And you wonder, if someone told your story someday, would they understand what it really felt like? Not the battles, not the victories or defeats, but the silence in between, the small, invisible moments that ate away at the soul. The day drags on. You lose count of the hours. By dusk, your unit reaches a ruined village, walls blackened by fire, roofs collapsed. Smoke still curls from the chimneys like dying breath. You find shelter in what used to be a schoolhouse. The chalkboard is still there, covered in ghostly words. You sit against the wall, the wood cold against your back, and close your eyes. For a moment, you let yourself drift, until a sound breaks the quiet. A cry, faint but unmistakable. Not a soldier, a child. You open your eyes. In the corner, behind a pile of rubble, something moves. You rise slowly, rifle ready, heart pounding. And there, in the dim light, you see her, a little girl, no older than 8, clutching a rag doll, her face streaked with soot. Her eyes meet yours, wide with terror and something else, recognition, maybe. She whispers something you don't understand, a word in a language you don't speak. You lower your rifle. The room feels smaller, the air heavier. Outside, snow begins to fall again, soft and relentless, covering everything in white, as if trying to erase it all. You stand there, frozen in place, unsure of what to do, as the child takes one cautious step toward you. And in that moment, the war feels unbearably human again. You realize survival isn't just about the body, it's about the heart and the terrible cost of keeping it alive. The wind moans outside, carrying with it the echo of distant engines, the hint of movement on the horizon. Reinforcements, maybe, or something worse. Either way, you know this brief calm won't last. Not here, not in this war. And as the snow thickens, swallowing the world in silence once more, you understand the truth every soldier learns too late. Survival is never certain, and peace is always just one step away from being broken. But somewhere in the dark, a new sound rises, the low rumble of engines drawing closer, the vibration creeping through the frozen ground beneath your boots. You glance toward the window, heart tightening. Something's coming. The engines grew louder that night, a low, rolling thunder crawling across the snow-covered fields, and with each second of vibration seeped deeper into your bones until it felt like the whole world was trembling beneath you. You press your ear to the cracked window frame, breath fogging the glass, and through the storm you see faint lights, headlamps, flickering like ghosts in the distance. Someone whispers, "Tanks!" and for a moment, no one breathes. The little girl still clutches her doll, her wide eyes reflecting the trembling light. You gesture for her to stay down, but she doesn't understand. Outside, the crunch of metal treads grinds against the ice, slow and steady, the sound of inevitability. The commander hisses orders, "Get ready, stay quiet, wait." You grip your rifle, palms slick with sweat despite the cold. Every nerve screams to run, but there's nowhere to go. The village is surrounded by open field, white and endless, no cover for miles. The girl lets out a small cough, and your heart stops. One of the soldiers beside you covers her mouth gently, eyes filled with something between fear and pity. You can hear your own pulse now, louder than the wind. Then a flare bursts overhead, exploding in a harsh white bloom that turns night into day. Shadows leap across the snow, long and distorted. You blink, momentarily blind, and when your vision clears, you see them. Dark figures moving between the ruins, helmets gleaming faintly under the dying light. The first shots crack like snapping branches. The window beside you shatters, shards of ice and glass cutting your cheek. You duck instinctively, pressing yourself flat against the wall as gunfire rips through the air. The sound is deafening, a constant hammering that fills every space in your head. You fire back blindly, hardly seeing where your bullets go. Smoke fills the room, thick and acrid, making your eyes water. Someone screams, a short, raw sound, and then silence except for the mechanical growl outside. The tank fires once, the blast shaking the entire building. Dust rains from the ceiling. The chalkboard splits down the middle with a sharp crack. You can't tell how long it lasts, seconds, minutes, hours. Time dissolves into noise and light and terror. When it finally stops, the air is heavy with the stench of burnt wood and blood. You lift your head. The roof is half gone. The officer is dead. The girl is gone too. You stumble outside, dizzy, half-deaf, boots slipping on the icy ground. The snow is red in patches, steaming faintly. You move through the wreckage, calling her name though you never knew it, voice breaking in the cold air. There's no answer, only the faint whimper of wind through the broken rafters. The world feels smaller now, shrunken to the size of your fear. You realize then that this isn't just a battle, it's a slow erasure. Every face, every name, every trace of humanity is being wiped away by the cold, by the smoke, by time itself. You sink to your knees, fingers digging into the snow. It's strange how warm it feels now. Or maybe your skin has gone numb enough not to care. You think of home again, not the idea of it, but the smell of it, the taste of bread, the sound of rain on the roof. And for a heartbeat, you're there. But the wind snaps you back. You can't afford memories. Not here. The surviving men regroup near what's left of the well. Someone's lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. Another one vomits quietly into the snow. The sergeant's voice is hoarse when he says you'll have to move before dawn. You want to argue, to ask why, but there's no point. Orders are oxygen here. Without them, you suffocate. You march again, though your legs barely obey. The snow keeps falling, thicker now, turning the world into a blur of white and gray. Every breath feels heavier, like breathing through wet cloth. You can't tell if the flakes on your eyelashes are melting or if your eyes are watering. The man ahead of you stumbles, falls, doesn't get up. No one stops. You keep walking because stopping means freezing, and freezing means dying. That's how simple it becomes. Movement equals life. Hours pass, maybe more. The sky begins to pale, and the horizon bleeds faint orange, the first light of morning creeping over the wasteland. You reach a forest, thin, bare trees black against the snow, and set up a temporary camp. The fire crackles weakly, more smoke than flame. You sit close enough to feel its feeble warmth on your face. Someone opens a tin of beans, divides them with a dull knife. The smell makes your stomach twist in hunger, but when you swallow, it sticks in your throat like sand. You chew anyway, because it's all you have. Around the fire, the men talk softly, voices low, almost reverent. One tells a story about his brother who fought in France and never came back. Another says he dreams every night of the sea, of waves and salt and gulls. You listen in silence, because speaking feels like temptation, as if naming what you miss might summon it back and break you completely. The forest is quiet except for the creak of branches and the whisper of snow falling through the leaves. You can smell the smoke, the wet bark, the faint metallic scent of blood that never really goes away. You close your eyes and for a moment imagine you're safe. But even here, the war follows. A distant explosion rolls through the air, dull and far, but unmistakable. You open your eyes, and the illusion shatters. The sergeant stands, pulling on his gloves. "We move at sunset," he says, and no one protests. You spend the day half sleeping, half listening, your mind floating somewhere between dreams and exhaustion. When evening comes, you rise again, legs stiff, breath clouding the cold air. The march continues, through the trees, across frozen rivers, past villages reduced to ash. Sometimes you pass civilians, faces pale and hollow, carrying what little they own in their arms. You look at them and wonder if they see you as savior or monster. Maybe both. At night, you hear them crying in the distance, the sound carried by the wind like a lament. You try not to listen. You tell yourself you're fighting for something, honor, country, survival. But those words feel thin now, worn out from too much repetition. What's left is the rhythm of your heartbeat and the weight of your rifle, the only constants in a world that keeps disappearing. One night, during a rare lull, you find a piece of paper tucked in your coat, a letter from home, creased and stained. You unfold it carefully, your fingers trembling. The handwriting is familiar but faint, the ink smudged by water or tears. You read it by the glow of a lantern. Talk of spring, of the garden blooming, of hope that you'll come home soon. The words cut deeper than any wound. You fold it back, slip it into your pocket, and stare at the fire until your vision blurs. The man beside you hums softly, a tune you don't recognize, maybe a lullaby. It drifts through the cold like a ghost of something kind. You close your eyes and listen. For a few seconds, you almost believe in peace. But the world doesn't rest long. The next morning, the alarm comes sudden and sharp. A scout's report, enemy movement nearby. You're ordered to dig in. Shovels bite into frozen earth, sparks flying where metal meets stone. Your hands blister, crack, bleed. You keep digging. The trenches you carve are shallow, ugly, barely enough to hide behind. Snow falls into them as fast as you dig it out. You can feel the tension building, a silent pressure pressing on your chest. When the attack comes, it's not what you expect. Not a barrage, not a charge, just silence, then shapes moving in the fog. The first muzzle flash blinds you, the sound so close it punches the air from your lungs. You return fire, the recoil jolting your shoulder. Someone shouts your name, but you can't tell where it comes from. The smoke thickens, and you cough until your throat burns. When the fog clears, the ground is littered with dark shapes. The snow drinks everything, hides it beneath a thin white skin. You look down and realize you're covered in someone else's blood. Your stomach heaves, but there's nothing to bring up. You stumble back, knees weak, the rifle slipping from your grasp. For a moment, the world tilts. The sky feels too close, the trees too far. You think of the girl again, her small hand clutching that doll, and wonder if she made out alive. The thought hurts more than the cold ever could. That night, no one speaks. The survivors sit in silence, eyes hollow. The fire burns low, the flames whispering against the wind. You can taste the smoke, bitter and thick, clinging to your tongue. Your body aches with a kind of tiredness that sleep can't cure. You realize then why you wouldn't survive. Not because of weakness, not even fear, but because war demands the death of empathy, and you can still feel. You can still see faces in the dark, still dream of warmth, still flinch when someone cries out. That's what kills you here, not bullets or frostbite, but the refusal to go numb. The others will last longer because they've already begun to fade inside. You watch the snow fall, endless, soundless, covering everything once more. It's almost beautiful in its indifference. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the engines start again, distant but growing. You tighten your grip on your rifle, the metal cold as ever, and feel the ground tremble. The war is moving again, closer this time, hungrier. And as the first flares rise above the forest, painting the sky with light, you understand. The fight will never stop. Not out there, not inside you. The only question left is how long you can keep walking before the snow finally takes you to. The third winter came like a punishment, colder, longer, crueler than the ones before, and by then the line between living and dying had blurred into something no one could name anymore. You wake before dawn every day because you can't really sleep, not the way you used to. The ground beneath your body is frozen solid, and even through the thin layer of cloth, you can feel the bones of the earth pressing into you. Your breath hangs in the air like smoke, twisting upward before fading into the black. Around you, the camp is silent except for the faint rattle of the wind through torn canvas and the soft creak of boots shifting in frost. The men don't talk much anymore. Words waste energy, and energy is all that keeps you from collapsing into the snow and staying there forever. You've learned how to ration your thoughts, one for the past, one for the moment, none for the future. You think of home sometimes, but even that image is fading now, like a photograph left in the sun too long. The faces blur. The sounds of laughter or rain or music feel foreign, as if they belong to another species. You wonder if that's what the war wants, to make you forget who you were so you could become something else, something empty enough to obey without breaking. At sunrise, the sky turns a sickly yellow, and the frost on the ground looks like shattered glass. The sergeant moves through the camp, shaking shoulders, barking orders in a voice that's more rasp than sound. You pull yourself up, bones creaking, joints stiff as rusted hinges. Your rifle is cold to the touch, the metal biting into your palms. You wipe a thin layer of ice off the barrel and sling it over your shoulder. Breakfast is a crust of bread and a few frozen potatoes that taste of mud. You chew slowly, forcing yourself to swallow. Every motion feels deliberate, mechanical. You no longer think about hunger or taste, only function. The orders come at midday. Move north, regroup near the river, hold the bridge at all costs. You've heard that phrase so many times it's meaningless now. At all costs has already taken everything from everyone. Still you move, always moving. The march takes hours, maybe more, across terrain that looks identical in every direction. White hills, black trees, sky the color of ash. Your boots are worn through at the soles, and every step sends a jolt of pain through your legs. The man beside you stumbles, catches himself, mutters a curse under his breath. His lips are blue. You offer him a piece of cloth to wrap his hand, but he shakes his head. "Save it," he says, voice barely audible. You keep walking. The river finally appears like a vein of steel cutting through the landscape. It's half frozen, the current sluggish beneath the ice. Across the water, the ruins of a town rise, just outlines, shells of buildings that once held life. Smoke curls from the remnants of chimneys, thin and gray. You sit up on your side of the bank, digging shallow positions with numb fingers. The snow turns to slush as your body heat melts it, soaking through your clothes. You can't feel your toes anymore, but you don't dare take off your boots to check. When night falls, the air grows heavier, thicker, as if the darkness itself has weight. You can hear movement on the other side of the river, voices clanking metal, boots crunching ice. You grip your rifle tighter, muscles tense. The first shell lands before you even hear the whistling. It hits the far bank, sending up a geyser of fire and snow. Then another, and another. The river lights up with flashes, the air filled with the hiss of shrapnel and the scream of metal tearing through flesh. You drop to the ground, face pressed into the ice, heart pounding so hard you can taste blood in your throat. Someone shouts for you to return fire. You lift your head just long enough to see the enemy's shapes moving through the smoke. You fire once, twice, then the rifle jams. Panic surges through you, raw, animal, uncontrollable. Your fingers fumble with the bolt, too cold to work properly. You can hear someone calling your name, but it's drowned by the roar of artillery. A blast goes off nearby, and a shockwave knocks you backward. For a moment, everything is silent, just a high, steady ringing in your ears. You blink, disoriented. The world moves in slow motion. Snow drifts lazily through the air, catching the light of burning debris. You realize you're on your back, staring at the sky. Your rifle lies a few meters away, half buried in the snow. You reach for it, but your arm doesn't respond. There's warmth spreading down your side, strange and wet. You look down and see the red blooming through your coat, too vivid against the white. You don't feel pain at first, just pressure, deep and dull, like being punched from the inside. The shock keeps you awake. You press your hand against the wound, but the blood keeps coming. The snow beneath you turns dark. Around you, the sounds of battle fade in and out. Voices shouting, explosions echoing like distant thunder. You think of running, of crawling, but your body has stopped listening. You try to focus on something else, anything else. A memory surfaces, the girl from the schoolhouse, the doll in her hand, the way she looked at you before the shell hit. You wonder if she's still alive somewhere, if she ever escaped this frozen nightmare. The thought fills you with a strange kind of peace, fragile but real. The world narrows to a tunnel of sound and light. You can hear your heartbeat slowing, steady but weaker each time. Someone drags you by the shoulders, shouting words you can't make out. You blink and see a familiar face above you, blurred and distant. "Hold on," he says, "just hold on." You want to answer, to tell him you're trying, but your mouth won't form the words. The cold seeps deeper now, not biting anymore, just numb, soft, almost comforting. The sky above shifts from black to deep blue, stars faint and flickering. You think you can hear water moving beneath the ice, steady, endless. Then everything fades again. When you wake, it's in a barn, dimly lit by a single lantern. The smell of straw and blood fills the air. Someone has wrapped your side in rough bandages that are already soaked through. You try to move, and pain shoots through your body like electricity. A medic crouches beside you, his face gray with exhaustion. "You're lucky," he says. You don't feel lucky. Outside, you can still hear distant fighting. You lie there for hours, drifting in and out of consciousness, the world flickering like a broken film reel. At some point, you realize the others have moved on. You've been left behind with the wounded. The medic packs up his kit, avoiding your eyes. "They'll come back for you," he says, but his voice cracks halfway through the sentence. You know they won't. Night falls again, and the temperature drops. The lantern sputters, then dies. You lie in the dark, listening to the wind claw at the walls. Your breath grows shallower, slower. You start to hallucinate. Faces in the shadows, whispers in the rafters, fragments of songs you haven't heard in years. You see the sea from your childhood, waves rolling under a golden sky. You see your mother's hands pulling bread from the oven. You see every face you've lost, all of them watching you with quiet understanding. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbles again, the endless rhythm of war continuing without you. You realize that's what it means not to survive, not just to die, but to disappear into the machinery, to become part of the noise, the landscape, the cold. You close your eyes and think maybe that's mercy. The wind howls louder, rattling the loose boards. Snow drifts in through the cracks, covering your boots, your legs, the edges of the cot. The pain fades, replaced by a deep, heavy calm. Your thoughts slow until they're barely thoughts at all, just images flickering at the edge of darkness. The sound of the river returns, steady and soft. You imagine it carrying everything away, the blood, the fear, the memories, washing the world clean. The last thing you feel is the snow settling over your chest, cold and light, like a hand telling you to rest. And then, at last, you do. The morning after your last heartbeat, the war didn't stop. It never does. The sun rose pale and indifferent, casting long shadows over the field where your body lay half buried in snow. Crows circled above, black smudges against a white sky. The river had frozen completely overnight, its surface smooth and silent, sealing beneath it the last echoes of gunfire and screams. No one came back for you. The column moved on, leaving the wounded and dead to the frost. That's how the world forgets, in silence, not malice. But if memory had weight, the air above you would have been crushing. Because even as your body cooled, your mind didn't vanish instantly. There was something left, a residue of thought, faint and wandering, drifting between moments that refused to die. You watch yourself from somewhere above, detached, like a flicker of light refusing to go out. The barn collapsed 2 days later, snow breaking through the roof, burying everything beneath. Then the wind came, erasing tracks, smoothing the surface of the earth until it looked as if no one had ever been there. And in that emptiness, the world went on killing itself. The front shifted east, then west, chewing through villages, forests, rivers. You saw it all from a place beyond pain, beyond hunger, beyond the body itself. You watched men crawl through mud and fire, their faces blank, their eyes already gone. You watched cities crumble, their lights extinguished one by one. The war wasn't made of heroes and villains. It was a machine, enormous and blind, grinding everything into the same dust. And yet, somewhere within it, small flickers of humanity refused to die, tiny, fragile flames in the storm. A medic kneeling beside a stranger, a mother hiding bread under her coat, a soldier whispering a prayer before the next barrage. You saw them all, and for a moment, you almost believed that kindness could survive even here. But belief is fragile. You drifted, season after season, through places you'd never see in life. Spring returned eventually, hesitant and cruel. The snow melted, revealing the dead. The rivers swelled with their ghosts, carrying them downstream into oblivion. Villagers came to bury what they found, marking graves with pieces of wood and names that didn't belong to the bodies beneath. Yours had no name, just a cross, crooked, half buried in the thawing mud. Somewhere, maybe a letter was sent that never arrived, a name carved on a wall among thousands of others. And yet, somehow, that didn't feel like the end, because endings require memory, and war consumes memory the way fire eats air. You lingered in the echoes, voices shouting orders, boots crunching gravel, the faint hum of engines moving through fog. You followed them, not by will, but by gravity, drawn to the living because they still carried the same fear that had shaped you. One night, deep in the woods, a new unit passed near the river. You recognized the rhythm of their march, the exhaustion in their steps. They were younger, thinner, quieter. You drifted among them unseen, hearing their whispers. One boy, barely 17, clutched a letter from home and read it under his breath. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady. You wanted to tell him to stop, to save that hope for later, because you already knew how easily it could be taken. But he kept reading, and the sound of it made something ache in the space where your heart used to be. The war pressed on. Summer came, thick with flies and rot. The front lines moved again. The forest burned. You saw men drown in rivers, collapse from hunger, disappear under rubble. You saw them laugh too, in strange bursts, wild, fragile laughter that broke the silence like gunfire. You realized then that laughter was the last act of defiance left. You followed a group retreating through a ruined town. The walls were black with soot, windows shattered, the air thick with the smell of burning oil. They stopped near a fountain filled with ash. One of them knelt to wash his face, and when he looked up, his reflection wavered in the gray water. For a second, he looked just like you. You tried to remember your own face, but couldn't. It was gone, blurred like the rest of you. Maybe that's mercy, you thought, to forget who you were when being yourself hurts too much. Time fractured. You couldn't tell if it was days or years anymore. The war folded over itself, repeating the same scenes in endless loops. Gunfire, silence, frost, mud, fire, laughter, death. Sometimes you thought you heard the girl again, the one with the doll. Her footsteps in the snow, her faint humming in the dark. You followed the sound, but it always led to nothing. Maybe she was another ghost, or maybe she was never real at all. Still, her voice stayed with you, a thread of warmth in the cold. Then came the end, not sudden, but slow, almost reluctant. The guns quieted. The skies cleared. Soldiers began to walk without looking over their shoulders. Flags rose again, tattered but bright. You thought peace would feel different, that the silence would heal. But it didn't. The world had gone quiet in the wrong way. Cities lay hollow. People smiled without light in their eyes. The living carried the war inside them now, tucked behind their ribs where no one could see. You watched them rebuild. You saw your comrades' names carved into stone memorials, neat rows of letters that meant everything to someone and nothing to the earth beneath. You saw parades, medals, speeches about victory and sacrifice. And you wanted to scream, not from anger, but from the terrible knowledge that no one could ever truly understand what they were celebrating. The war had ended on paper, but in the minds of those who survived, it kept burning. You saw a veteran on a park bench once, staring at nothing, his hands trembling. A child passed by and asked him what the war was like. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because how do you explain something that eats the language itself? You drifted away again into the quiet places where memory fades, the forests, the rivers, the fields that had swallowed so much. Nature doesn't care for history. The grass grew over the trenches. Birds nested in helmets. The bones turned to dust. And yet, every spring, when the snow melts and the earth exhales, something stirs. A faint hum, a whisper, the memory of marching boots under the soil. You realize then that you never really left. None of you did. You're the wind moving through the ruins, the echo in the broken church bell, the shimmer of heat over an empty road. You are the silence that follows gunfire. That's the real reason you wouldn't survive. Not because of bullets, not because of fear, but because war doesn't let anyone survive it. Not truly. It just changes what survives. The boy with the letter grows old, his hair turning gray. He still dreams of that winter by the river. He doesn't know why the sound of flowing water makes him cry sometimes. He doesn't remember your face, but he feels it like a weight in his chest when the first snow falls each year. And somewhere beneath that snow, your nameless grave breathes quietly, a pulse under the frozen ground. You think maybe that's enough, not to be remembered, but to be felt, to be part of something that refuses to vanish. The world moves on. The machines get faster. The city's brighter. The children learn new wars from screens, and when they look at the old photographs, grainy faces, helmets, rifles, they think, I wouldn't survive that. And you, the voice lost in the wind, want to tell them the truth. No one does. Not really, because the war never ends. It just changes shape, hiding in the spaces between peace and progress, waiting for the next generation to forget what cold feels like. You drift farther from the earth, into light, into nothing. The river below glimmers, endless, patient. Somewhere, a bell rings, deep and hollow, carrying across the fields. It's a sound you remember from before, though you can't say why. The light grows brighter. The noise fades. You think for the briefest moment that maybe this is what peace finally feels like. Not silence, not victory, just release. And then there's nothing left but wind and snow and the faint echo of soldiers' breath dissolving into eternity. The years rolled forward, dragging the world with them. And yet the war never truly loosened its grip. Decades passed, but the earth still whispered with the memory of blood, and every spring thaw unearthed the bones of men who never made it home. The wind carried their stories through the fields, through the quiet towns rebuilt over their graves, through the hearts of those who never knew their names. You were among them still, not alive, not gone, something in between, drifting through time like smoke that refuses to fade. You had no form anymore, no heartbeat, no breath, but you remembered. Memory was your curse and your anchor. You watched as the world healed itself on the surface while rotting underneath. The ruins became monuments. The fields turned to highways. The rivers carried ships instead of bodies. Children played where the trenches once split the ground open. Their laughter echoed through the air, pure and bright. But underneath it, the earth hummed with ghosts. You drifted through a museum once invisible, inaudible. Behind glass, you saw the rifle you once held cleaned and labeled Infantry Standard 1943. You saw uniforms, medals, photos of men frozen mid-smile, their eyes unknowingly looking toward death. People walked past them in silence, eyes glazed with a kind of distant reverence, but no one smelled the cordite. No one felt the weight of frostbitten fingers gripping cold metal. You wanted to shout, to tell them that these were not relics, but warnings that beneath every metal lay a heartbeat that stopped too soon. But you couldn't. The living have no ears for the dead. Still, you lingered. You followed the living as they rebuilt their world, as they turned the past into legend and the dead into stories. The war became a subject for books, for movies, for classrooms. They studied it, measured it, memorized its statistics. They spoke of strategy, of nations, of victory. But they never spoke of the silence, the kind that settles after the last shot, the kind that lives forever in the mind of anyone who has seen too much. You floated through one of those classrooms once. The teacher pointed at a map, tracing red and blue lines with her finger. "This was the turning point," she said. The students nodded. One of them yawned. You wanted to grab that map, tear it apart, scream that the real turning point wasn't a battle, but the moment when men stopped recognizing themselves in the eyes of their enemies. But even as a ghost, your voice had no place here. Outside, the world moved faster. New wars erupted in new lands. The weapons changed, sharper, cleaner, quieter, but the fear was the same. You recognized it instantly. The way soldiers trembled before dawn, the way mothers stared at empty doorways, the way smoke rose over cities and no one could look away. You saw them all, and for a moment, you thought maybe you could reach them, warn them, stop them from repeating your fate. But the living never listen to the dead. They only inherit their mistakes. You found yourself drawn back to the river one winter. It was the same place, though it no longer looked it. The forest was smaller now, the water clearer. A bridge stood where once there had been ice and corpses. Cars crossed it every few minutes, their headlights flickering like ghosts of lanterns. You hovered above the surface, watching the reflections ripple. Somewhere beneath, you knew your bones still lay buried, part of the riverbed now, part of the earth that had learned to forget. You waited there as snow began to fall again, slow and steady. The sound was the same as it had been that night, the whisper of inevitability. And in that sound, you began to remember the moments before death, the flare in the sky, the girl's voice, the smell of smoke. You realized then that you were still searching for something, though you no longer knew what. Forgiveness, maybe, or peace, or a reason why it had to be you, why it had to be anyone. The snow thickened and the world blurred. Through the storm, a figure appeared on the bridge, a man in a dark coat, stopping halfway across. He looked down at the river, his breath clouding the air. You moved closer, drawn by something you couldn't name. When he took off his hat, you saw his hair was gray, his face lined by time and memory. And then you recognized him, the boy with the letter. He was old now, his hands trembling as he pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper, yellowed and frayed. He unfolded it carefully, as if afraid it might crumble. His lips moved as he read it silently, and though you couldn't hear the words, you felt them, each one like a pulse through the air. It was the same letter he'd carried all those years ago, the one that had kept him alive when everything else was dying. When he finished reading, he looked down at the river for a long time. His eyes glistened, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something heavier. Then, slowly, he whispered, "I'm sorry." The wind carried his voice across the water, and it reached you like a thread of light in the dark. For a moment, the years between you vanished. He was that boy again, scared and hopeful, clutching a rifle too big for his hands. You wanted to tell him you forgave him, that none of it was his fault, that no one was meant to survive something like that whole. But the words stayed trapped inside you, lost in the endless silence between worlds. Still, he seemed to hear you. He smiled faintly, a sad, broken smile, then folded the letter and let it fall into the river. You watched it drift downstream, spinning slowly in the current. It floated past where you lay, past the field where you died, past the ruins that had become earth again. As it disappeared into the distance, something inside you loosened. The cold that had held you for so long began to fade. You felt warmth, not heat, but memory, the echo of life returning like sunlight through closed eyes. The snow fell harder now, covering the bridge, the river, the man who had once been a boy. He stood there a while longer, then turned and walked away, his figure dissolving into the white. You stayed behind, hovering above the river that had carried everything away. The silence around you was different now, not empty, but whole. For the first time since the war began, you felt something like peace. You realized that surviving wasn't about breathing or fighting or winning. It was about remembering, about carrying the truth when the world tries to bury it. And maybe, in some way, the boy had done that for both of you. The snow kept falling, covering everything in the same soft stillness. You close your eyes and let it bury you again, not in pain, but in rest. Time moved on without you. The world changed again. Decades turned into centuries. The war became history, then myth, then a whisper in the wind. The last survivors died, their memories fading into the soil. The fields bloomed with wildflowers where once there had been fire. Children ran through them, laughing, their footsteps light on the same earth that had drunk your blood. They didn't know your name, but sometimes when the wind shifted, one of them would stop, look toward the river, and feel something, an ache, a shiver, a memory that wasn't theirs. That was enough. You had become part of the world again, not as a soldier, not as a ghost, but as silence itself. The kind that follows tragedy, the kind that makes people listen. And in that silence, you finally understood why you wouldn't have survived the war. Because to survive would mean to forget, to live without remembering the cost. And you, even in death, refused to forget. That was your curse. That was your victory. The wind rose again, carrying the sound of the river through the fields. The snow melted. The stars appeared, distant and bright, watching over a world that never learned but always continued. You drifted into the current, light as breath, endless as time. And as you dissolved into the rhythm of the earth, the last trace of your voice whispered through the air. Not a plea, not a warning, but a truth. No one survives war. They only outlast it. The war was over, or so the history books claimed, but time had a strange way of keeping alive. Decades blurred together like smoke, and still the echoes of that endless winter clung to the soil, the trees, the air itself. You were no longer a soldier, no longer even a ghost, but something less and something more, an idea, a memory woven into the fabric of the earth that refused to let go. The living had forgotten your face, your voice, your name, but you could still feel them walking above you, their feet pressing lightly on the same ground where you once bled. They thought the war had ended because the shooting stopped, because treaties were signed and flags were raised, but wars don't end that way. They end when the last dream of peace is finally real, and that day never came. You could see them now, generations born long after the fire had gone out, carrying pieces of the old war inside them without ever realizing it. The fear in their eyes when sirens wailed, the way they flinched at thunder, the way silence made them uneasy, it was all residue, a whisper of what once was. You drifted among them unseen, feeling their restlessness like static in the air. The world was louder now, brighter, faster. Machines roared where once only horses and men had marched. Cities glowed, even at midnight, lights stretching into the horizon like false constellations. People moved quickly, always chasing something, always trying to fill the space that silence once occupied. They thought they were free, but you could see it in their eyes. They were running from ghosts they couldn't name. One evening, you found yourself in one of those cities. You followed the hum of voices, the pulse of electricity, until you reached a museum again, larger than before, glass and steel reflecting the clouds. Inside, rows of displays stretched endlessly. Uniforms, helmets, faded letters under glass. There was your rifle again, though this time it looked smaller, almost harmless. Children walked past it, bored, tugging on their parents' sleeves. One boy stopped, reading the tag beside it. His lips moved silently as he sounded out the words. Private First Class. Unknown. He frowned, then looked up at his father. Why doesn't he have a name? The father smiled softly, a little sadly. Because sometimes no one remembers. The boy nodded, but his eyes lingered on the rifle. For a brief moment, you thought he saw you. His gaze seemed to pierce through the years, the walls, straight into the void where you drifted. Then he blinked, and the moment was gone. You felt something heavy stir within you, a longing you thought had faded. To be remembered, to be real again. But the war had taken that from you. It took everything. You wandered out of the city, following the road east, until the buildings gave way to fields and forests again. The air grew colder, sharper, like it used to be. The trees were older now, taller, their branches reaching into the gray sky like the hands of the fallen. You recognized the landscape, even though it had changed. The same hills, the same river winding like a scar through the earth. Time had softened the edges, but you could still feel the memory beneath the surface. The ground still remembered where men had crawled and cried and died. The wind still carried the smell of gunpowder when the rain came. You followed the river upstream until you reached a clearing. The bridge the old man once stood on was gone, collapsed into the water long ago. Moss covered the stones, and wildflowers grew between them. You hovered there, listening to the quiet. It was peaceful now, almost sacred. But peace felt strange to you, foreign, fragile, unreal. You looked at the sky and realized you no longer feared it. There were no planes, no flares, no smoke. Only clouds drifting lazily, indifferent and eternal. And yet, beneath that calm, something stirred. The memories began to return, not as images this time, but as sensations. The sting of snow on your skin, the taste of iron in your mouth, the way your hands trembled when you tried to light a cigarette after battle. You remembered faces too, though the names were gone. Men laughing in the dark, pretending not to be afraid. The boy with the letter, the girl whose voice you still heard when the wind blew through the trees. You realized that you were the sum of all those fragments, a collection of moments that refused to die. The world had moved on, but you hadn't. You were still fighting a war that ended long ago, not against enemies, but against forgetting. Because forgetting was the true death, and you weren't ready for that yet. You sank lower, closer to the river's edge, and saw your reflection ripple on the surface. It wasn't a face anymore, just the outline of shadow. But as the water moved, shapes formed within it. Eyes, a mouth, the faint trace of a smile you once had. For a heartbeat, you looked alive again. And then the current took it away. The river didn't care. It never had. It carried the living and the dead alike, washing everything into the same vast silence. You wondered how many others drifted beneath its surface, how many voices whispered in its depths. You listened closely and thought you heard them, faint, broken words rising like bubbles through the water. Some were prayers, some curses, some names repeated again and again until they dissolved into nothing. You wanted to join them, to finally let go, but something held you back. The world above still called to you. The living still needed to remember. You lifted your gaze toward the horizon, where the sky burned faintly with the last light of day. And there, faint and flickering, you saw something impossible, a campfire. Figures sat around it, silhouettes against the dusk. You floated closer, drawn by a pull older than time. There were 6 of them, young men dressed not in uniforms but in modern clothes, hoodies, jeans, sneakers. They laughed quietly, passing around a bottle, their breath fogging in the cold air. But as you came closer, you saw it. Their faces, their eyes. You knew them. Not exactly, but almost. The same eyes, the same fear hidden behind their laughter, the same confusion about why the world was the way it was. They could have been your comrades from long ago, reincarnated, reborn, still searching for meaning. One of them stared into the flames, his voice barely above a whisper. You ever think about what it would have been like back then? In the war. The others shrugged. One said, yeah, but we wouldn't survive that. None of us would. The words hit you like a bullet. You wanted to tell him he was right. Not because they were weak, but because no one ever truly survives war. The body may return, but the soul never does. The fire cracked, sparks rising into the night like fleeting souls. The boys fell silent, lost in thought. You hovered just beyond the light, watching, remembering. Maybe that was enough. Maybe this was why you still lingered, not to haunt, but to remind. The war wasn't history. It was a warning written into the bones of the earth, a story that would keep repeating until someone finally listened. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of smoke and pine. One of the boys shivered and glanced toward the trees. His eyes met yours, or where yours would have been. For a moment, everything stopped. The fire, the wind, even time itself. He didn't move, didn't speak. Then, slowly, he whispered, "Did you hear that?" The others looked around, uneasy, but the sound was gone. You had already faded back into the dark, carried by the wind that never rests. As you drifted higher, the forest shrinking beneath you, you looked down one last time. The fire glowed faintly, a tiny circle of light in an endless sea of shadow. You realized that this was how it had always been, light and dark, life and death, forever intertwined. And you understood, finally, that survival wasn't about escaping war. It was about carrying its truth into the world that follows. You would never stop wandering, never stop whispering, because the world would never stop forgetting. And so you kept moving through time, through silence, through generations that didn't know your name but still carried your fear. The world below you pulsed with life and noise, but you were the stillness between heartbeats, the echo between breaths. You were the reminder of what it cost to call yourself human. The stars above flickered faintly, cold and distant, watching a world that never learned. And you whispered again, though no one would ever hear it, you wouldn't survive as a soldier in World War II, because no one ever did. Not really. Not even the ones who came home. The night stretched forever, cold and infinite, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound and memory whole. And still you drifted, weightless between time and the breath of the world. The forest below had long turned to ash and regrown again, but the echoes never left. They were trapped beneath roots and rivers, whispers soaked into stone. You had become one of them, something between presence and absence, wandering the places where the world forgot to look. You thought there was nothing left to see, no story left to tell, and yet the wind carried something new, a rhythm, faint and deliberate, like the pulse of distant drums. You followed it. The sound grew louder as the horizon began to pale with morning. The sky bled from black to gray, then to a color almost like hope. You hadn't seen dawn in decades. War had always stolen it before it arrived. The drums became clearer now, boots, hundreds of them, marching in rhythm. But it wasn't the march of the living. You saw them then, emerging from mist, ranks of soldiers in tattered uniforms, rifles slung, helmets cracked, eyes hollow. Every army, every flag, side by side without distinction. Germans, Russians, Americans, British, Japanese, all walking together toward the same light rising in the east. None spoke. None needed to. You joined them without meaning to, your steps falling into sync with theirs. You could feel it now, the end approaching, the final movement of a song that had never stopped playing. The light ahead was blinding, warm in a way you hadn't felt since before the war, before the snow, before fear. And as you walked, the ghosts around you began to fade, dissolving into the air like mist touched by sunlight. You felt the same pull on yourself, a quiet unraveling. Memories flickered, mud, gunfire, laughter, the weight of a rifle, the smell of bread stolen from a dying town. You didn't fight it this time. You let them go, one by one, until only one remained. The sound of your heartbeat, slow and steady, like a drum echoing through eternity. Then even that began to fade. The light grew until it filled everything. For the first time in a lifetime, you felt warmth that didn't hurt. The war receded, not ended, but finally silent. You were ready to disappear, ready to rest. But before you could, something shifted. The light flickered, and you saw them. Faces. Not soldiers this time. Civilians. The living. People standing in the same clearing you'd crossed long ago, now a memorial site. There were children, parents, tourists, veterans in wheelchairs. They were quiet, listening as a man spoke into a microphone. You hovered unseen above them, the wind carrying his words to you. "We gather not to glorify war, but to remember its cost," he said, his voice trembling slightly. They were young, terrified, and human. Each one had a name, a story, a heartbeat. Some I remembered, most are not, but they mattered. He paused, looking toward the stone monument before him. A simple block of granite etched with countless names, and beneath them, 2 words, "Unknown Soldier." "To all who never came home," he said softly, "we remember you." For a moment, you couldn't move. Something broke inside you, not in pain but release. The words echoed in you, real and alive. You were no longer forgotten. You weren't a ghost lost in endless winter. You were part of something greater, something that had finally learned to listen. A breeze moved through the crowd, lifting fallen leaves from the ground. The children chased them, laughing. The sound was pure, unscarred by memory. You felt yourself lifting with that wind, lighter than you'd ever been. The forest, the monument, the people, all drifted below, smaller and smaller. You rose through layers of sky until the clouds opened around you. And there, waiting at the edge of the light, were the others, the soldiers you had marched beside in silence. They were no longer weary. Their faces were whole again, eyes clear and calm. You recognized some of them. The boy with the letter, the medic who never stopped running, the enemy soldier who didn't shoot. They nodded to you, and you understood without words, it was time. The war had no more claim on you. Together you stepped forward, crossing the threshold where light became everything. For the first time since the beginning, there was peace, not the fragile kind made by men, but the eternal kind made by forgetting fear. You thought that was the end, but even in eternity, the world kept moving. Below, generations passed, and still they told your story, not with glory or pride, but with truth. They built museums and wrote books, not to honor the killing, but to remind themselves of what it cost. Sometimes they got it wrong. Sometimes they forgot again. But somewhere, always, there was one person who remembered, the boy in the museum, now grown, standing before the same rifle case. His son asked, why didn't he survive? And the man smiled sadly, because nobody really did. The child frowned, confused, then said, but we're alive. The man nodded, because they weren't. The child looked thoughtful for a long time, then reached out and touched the glass. His reflection shimmered, and for the briefest second, you saw yourself there again. Whole, young, alive. Then it was gone, and he turned away, running toward the sunlight outside. You watched him go, and you smiled, because maybe that was enough. Maybe survival wasn't about lasting through the war, but about leaving behind something that made peace possible. Maybe every sacrifice, every horror, every whisper of fear had built this moment. The simple laughter of a child in a world where the guns no longer roared. You drifted one last time over the earth. The scars were still there if you knew where to look, but grass grew over them, and rivers ran clear. The ruins had turned to gardens. The air no longer smelled of fire. Humanity hadn't learned everything, but it had learned enough to begin again. You followed the horizon as the sun rose, painting the world in colors you had forgotten existed: gold, blue, endless green. And as light touched every corner of the sky, you finally felt yourself dissolving, not into nothing, but into everything. The earth, the wind, the water, the memory. You were not gone. You were part of the story now, told and retold by voices that would never meet you, but would still feel your shadow when they spoke your name. History didn't forget. It changed, slowly, painfully, beautifully. Somewhere, a new soldier took his first breath, unaware of the weight of those who came before. Somewhere else, a historian opened a file marked unknown. Somewhere, A poet wrote a line about war and love and ghosts that never die. And in all of it, you were there, quiet, unseen, eternal. The war had ended not because peace was achieved, but because you finally let go. You were the silence after the last shot, the calm after the last scream, the truth left standing when all the lies burned away. The world turned on, indifferent and alive, and you drifted with it, whispering softly to those who still dreamed. You wouldn't survive as a soldier in World War II, not because you were weak, but because no one truly could. Survival wasn't measured in breath or blood. It was measured in memory. And you, at last, had become one.